Hi, I'm Jonah Comstock, Editor-in-Chief of Pharma Forum. I'm here at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference in San Francisco. I'm joined by Steve Pakola, the Chief Medical Officer at REGENXBIO. Thanks for joining me today, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Jonah.
So, REGENX gene therapy company, that's obviously a pretty exciting area. Tell me a little bit about what you guys specialize in and what your approach to gene therapy looks like.
Sure. So we've actually been leaders in gene therapy for over a decade now and have been responsible for a lot of the landmark advances that have happened in the space. And we're seeing our own development programs advance to quite meaningful stages. So we're actually on the cusp of potential commercialization of 3 different lead assets.
Right, yeah.
And these are for meaningful indications where there's a significant unmet need. And they're all in or through pivotal stage clinical development. So this year is really going to be quite exciting for us. And we're really going to see a lot come to fruition.
Do you think you're looking at seeing approvals this year, or?
Yes. So
Readouts,
one of the programs is RGX-121, which is for treatment of Hunter syndrome or MPS II. And we're actually going to finish submission of a BLA for this program. And that means under accelerated approval, we anticipate actually having approval later this year. And that's going to set us up to actually be commercial stage with this program by early next year. So that's a significant milestone for gene therapy and also for our company as our first planned commercialization.
And you've got a couple of others. I think there was one for Duchenne, muscular dystrophy. Tell me about the other programs you have.
Sure. So the other 2 programs are for massive blockbuster potential indications with really significant unmet need. One is RGX-202 for treatment of Duchenne, and the other is RGX-314 for the treatment of retinal conditions, specifically wet AMD and diabetic retinopathy.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge
market. And that's one of the reasons we're able to achieve a strategic partnership with AbbVie, a global recognized leader in ophthalmology.
Right.
So that's a real validation for that program. So I can start with RGX-202 for Duchenne, which has advanced into pivotal development after a successful end of phase 2 meeting earlier this year. And we're planning to complete enrollment in the pivotal study this year, which also has us on track to plan for approval and then commercialization in 2026. So another program we're really on the cusp of getting to potential commercialization. We also in 2025 are going to have additional clinical data from our phase 2 study for Duchenne. And we've already seen what we need to continue to see in terms of an initial BLA submission under accelerated approval, which is basically the biomarker microdystrophin, which we've seen a very clear signal to date. We've also actually seen functional benefit in patients treated with Duchenne. So this is very critical for us because we've seen it beat benchmarks within the field, both natural history and benchmarks of what's clinically meaningful. And this is a translation into our theory of what we expected as far as differentiation of our microdystrophin construct for gene therapy. So there's already Elevidys on the market, which is already shown that it can be a blockbuster, but it's generally recognized that that's a first generation gene therapy, as it's based on basically a molecule developed over 10 years ago in a lab. And there hasn't been the opportunity to optimize the construct that we've been able to take advantage of. So, for example, we've been able to create a microdystrophin construct that includes the CT terminal domain. And this is important because that's closest to natural occurring dystrophin. And so what we're seeing from a real world standpoint, as far as when we talk to clinicians, when we talk to patient advocacy groups, we see these audiences, key audiences, are clamoring for a second generation gene therapy that could improve upon the modest effects that have been seen with first generation gene therapy. So we're seeing the potential expand, and we're seeing us get very close to BLA and subsequently approval. And really, we're first in line to be a fast follower with a best-in-class potential for gene therapy.
So I know one of the issues with gene therapy is just the logistics of delivering it, right? It's usually not a pill or something as simple as that. How are your gene therapies administered, and how is your sort of like, as you are thinking about pursuing a blockbuster, how do you think about like making sure that it's scalable and you can get it into the hospitals and things like that?
Sure. I think one overarching thing to remember here is these are all one-time therapies. That's
Yeah.
really one of the benefits of gene therapy, that you provide the protein, whether that's a missing protein or a therapeutic protein. In terms of the other program we have that we can still speak about, of course, 314, that you can have sustained production and have sustained effect without needing to repeat dosing. And that's certainly one of the differentiators for our program. So whatever effort is needed to deliver the dose, it's clearly much less than other therapies in each of the indications that we pursue. One key advantage that we have as leaders in the space is we've been at this for a while, thinking of how to innovate and how to optimize exactly considerations like you're raising. One problem that a lot of people have had is cost of goods, particularly for an indication like Duchenne, where you have to give high systemic dose levels. And our company has been a leader in terms of optimizing production. And this was a high priority for us years ago, where we said we want to control our own fate. We want to actually make our own product, make it with high quality, make it not just for clinical trials, but make it for the actual commercial market. And so we've gone with the best-in-class approach for production, which is what's called suspension cell bioreactor production, which has higher yields and allows us to have higher purity. And that's an advance over other therapies that are being manufactured, things like Elevidys, which still doesn't use that mode of production. So all these factors ensure, we believe, a higher purity and also higher yields that will really impact cost of goods and really put us in a good position where we're either going to be first in class, or where we're a first follower, we could be a best in class.
Got it. I know at last year's JPM, we were following right on the heels of that historic FDA announcement about the 2 gene therapies for sickle cell. What has sort of happened since then with the FDA's, I know clearing gene therapies and approving gene therapies has been a big priority of the administration, at least that's what they've said. I mean, have we seen more in the past year? Are we looking to see more and more as we go forward? How does that look from where you sit?
Yeah, I think what we've learned from some of these other approvals and launches is it's not just enough to get approval. It has to be a value proposition that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has to do with not just how big a market is per se, or what type of benefit you can achieve. It's how does that compare to what exists? And I think that's the problem that other programs, particularly cell-based therapies, have run into, is really making that transition. And I think also some concerns about safety that are specific to some of the cell-based therapies. That's one of the reasons why we're excited about all 3 of our programs, where we know in each of these indications, it's not a marginal improvement that we're talking about compared to existing therapies. It's really transformational and has the opportunity in each of these indications to change the standard of care meaningfully. So I think you really have to start from that basis when you think of how well an approval is going to translate into actual success for patients. And 314, which we haven't spoken about for retinal conditions, really epitomizes this.
Yeah, so tell me more about 314.
Sure. So this is a program, again, that we have in collaboration with our strategic partner, AbbVie, global development for subretinal delivery to the retina to treat wet AMD. And we actually have that in pivotal development for treatment of wet AMD. And this is another case where we're leaders in the space. We're evaluating 1,200 patients in our pivotal program around the world. So that makes this easily the largest gene therapy program ever performed.
Wow.
So that shows our commitment to it. It shows AbbVie's commitment and belief in this program. And part of that is on the heels of very exciting phase 2 data where we've shown not only anatomic control of the disease and good visual outcomes, but we've seen this with a dramatic reduction in injection burden. In other words, how many times the patients have to have injection of existing anti-VEGF agents. And some of the patients need no injections. And this is critical because that's the big unmet need.
Right.
The repeated injections that are needed to control wet AMD that you can do in a clinical trial setting are simply not being given in a real world setting. So patients, believe it or not, continue to lose vision and go blind, even though there are these agents out there that are approved. So the major need is an agent that you can give one time that gives the sustained activity to reduce that burden so patients can have benefit on visual acuity that lasts longer than exists now. One of the things that's really garnered a lot of excitement for us and AbbVie and the clinical community is 314 for treatment of diabetic retinopathy. And here the unmet need is even larger because we know that repeated anti-VEGF injections can decrease the risk of vision-threatening complications like diabetic macular edema and proliferative diabetic retinopathy, which lead to blindness in this indication, which is the biggest cause of blindness in the working age population. But again, the unsustainability of telling a patient who's currently asymptomatic but is at high risk of developing a blinding complication.
You have to get regular
When
injection.
a retina specialist tells a patient, we hear this all the time from retina specialists, that the patients aren't going to sign up for that, but yet these patients are on an inevitable course to having worsening diabetic retinopathy. So the only way to meet that need is a one-time in-office injection. And that's why we in AbbVie are advancing with suprachoroidal delivery, a different route of administration than our wet AMD pivotal program, because suprachoroidal delivery allows for in-office injection.
Yeah.
And here as well, we already have positive phase 2 data where we're achieving exactly what we want to achieve, which is, first of all, safety. Patients are doing very well from a safety standpoint. And from an efficacy standpoint, we've shown administration of RGX-314 allows stability of underlying diabetic retinopathy. And what's really been the most eye-popping is we've seen an 89% reduction in development of vision-threatening complications.
Wow.
So that's why we in AbbVie are excited this morning that we announced plans to develop a pivotal program for treatment of diabetic retinopathy this year.
Awesome. Well, I think I have to wrap it there to make my next meeting, but thank you so much, Steve.
Great.
Really interesting stuff, and it seems like it's going to be a really big year for you guys.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonah.
Have a great show.